The grand chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered with cold, artificial light, its vaulted ceiling reflecting the gathered might of 100 civilizations. Rows of alien dignitaries sat in a crescent formation, their varied forms draped in regal silks, glistening armor, or the bioorganic plating of their kind. The air thrummed with the hum of translation devices, distilling the cacophony of languages into a sterile, uniform cadence. High Chancellor Vex Terra stood at the center of it all, a towering figure encased in ceremonial obsidian robes that accentuated the bioluminescent veins running along his elongated skull. His voice carried the weight of 1,000 cycles of rulership, each word measured, absolute. The matter of the humans has been settled. A murmur of approval rippled through the chamber. Some delegates exchanged knowing glances while others, less invested, merely waited for the official decree to be spoken so they could return to more pressing matters. Humanity had been a curiosity, a primitive species that had advanced too, quickly, clawing its way into interstellar politics with a reckless disregard for tradition. Their presence had become a nuisance, their ambitions a growing concern. It was time to remind them of their place. The human delegation sat at the lowest tier of the chamber, positioned quite deliberately beneath the gathered counselors. Their lead representative, Trade Minister Bryn Calloway, remained unperturbed. She was a slight woman by human standards, her sharp, calculating eyes betraying nothing, as she folded her hands neatly on the polished surface of the table before her. Vex Terra let the silence linger before speaking again, ensuring the weight of the moment pressed firmly upon them. The Council has deemed your species unfit for full membership within the Galactic Order. Your systems will be subject to sanctioned restrictions, your trade routes limited to approved sectors, and all diplomatic privileges rescinded. One might have expected an outburst, desperation, pleading, perhaps an impassioned argument about fairness. Humans were known for their unpredictability, their fiery tempers, their illogical attachments to concepts like honor and defiance. Instead, Bryn Calloway smiled. It was not the forced, polite expression of a diplomat masking disappointment. It was something else entirely, an amused, knowing smirk that sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. I see. Her voice was measured, almost amused. Well, thank you for your assessment. She stood. Not a word of protest, not even the courtesy of false indignation. The other human delegates followed suit, pushing their chairs back with a deliberate slowness that felt strangely rehearsed. One of them, a man with streaks of gray at his temples, whispered something into Calloway's ear. She chuckled, nodding as if he had just shared an inside joke. They were leaving. The chamber, accustomed to the fiery disputes of countless species, fell into an unnatural hush. Vex Terra frowned. Is that all you have to say? Calloway turned, her expression unreadable. What more is there? You've made your decision. We respect it. Another murmur, this time laced with uncertainty. The human delegation strode toward the exit, their boots striking an even tempo against the polished floor. No arguing, no desperate attempts to sway the council, no visible sign of defeat. A delegate from the Zilleri Dominion, a species known for its shrewd economic prowess, clicked its mandibles in confusion. Humans do not surrender this easily. Its multifaceted eyes tracked them like a predator, uncertain if its prey was playing dead or preparing to strike. Vex Terra silenced the growing whispers with a raised hand. They recognized the inevitable. The human expansion into our trade networks was an affront to the natural order. They will suffer the consequences. Yet as the great chamber doors sealed behind the departing humans, a small sliver of doubt burrowed into his thoughts. Hours later, in the privacy of his chambers, he summoned a data interface and pulled up a real-time report of trade movements along the Council's primary routes. He expected to see signs of disruption, human freighters being turned away, their enterprises struggling in the wake of the Council's decree. Instead, the charts showed a disturbing anomaly. Human ships were already rerouting. Their trade networks, instead of collapsing, were shifting, redirecting. Within moments of the Council's declaration, they had begun forging alternative pathways, abandoning Council-controlled hubs in favor of non-aligned territories. The projections showed a temporary dip in human trade, but it was stabilizing faster than it should have been. He magnified, a cluster of new shipping lanes forming along the outer rim. The destinations were troubling: independent factions, old warlords, forgotten colonies. Places the Council had long ignored, deeming them unworthy of attention. The humans were already rebuilding. A warning notification blinked into existence, a high-priority update from the Council's Economic Division. Vexterra opened the message, his unease deepening as the words unfurled before him. Preliminary assessment indicates minimal disruption to human economic networks. Their primary trade centers have already adapted. Projections suggest a potential increase in human-controlled trade within non-Council space within the next cycle. His grip tightened around the edge of the data console. This was impossible. No species could adapt this quickly, not without preparation. Had the humans anticipated their rejection? Had they expected the sanctions? Another message flashed. A communique from an intelligence operative stationed at a neutral port. Unusual activity detected among non-aligned factions. Multiple diplomatic meetings initiated by human representatives. Early reports suggest negotiations for exclusive trade partnerships. Vexterra exhaled slowly. They had been outmaneuvered. A chill settled into his core as he replayed Calloway's parting smile in his mind. It had not been the smile of a defeated species. It had been something else. It had been the smile of a predator that had just watched its prey step into the trap. For the first time in 1,000 cycles, High Chancellor Vexterra felt the unsettling stirrings of fear. The Council chambers no longer carried the air of certainty they once did. What had begun as a confident rejection of humanity had unraveled into something far more troubling. The reports flooding in from trade sectors, economic hubs, and intelligence operatives painted an impossible picture. One that defied every projection, every expectation. The humans were not suffering under the imposed sanctions. They were thriving. High Chancellor Vexterra studied the latest economic readouts in rigid silence. The primary Council-sanctioned trade hubs showed a slow but unmistakable decline in activity. Meanwhile, independent markets, many of which had been dormant for cycles, were experiencing an unprecedented surge. The common denominator in all of it: humanity. The Zilari delegate was the first to voice what many had begun to suspect. The humans were prepared for this, the insectoid murmured, its mandibles clicking in agitation. They had contingency plans. No species adapts this quickly unless they had already anticipated our actions. Vexterra did not answer immediately. He had spent years overseeing the delicate economic web of the Galactic Council, ensuring that its power remained absolute. Every species within the Order was tied to the same supply chains, reliant on the same infrastructure, vulnerable to the same pressures. That was the purpose of control, to ensure that no one could challenge the balance. Yet somehow the humans had rewritten the rules. They are redirecting their trade routes outside of our jurisdiction, the Zilari continued. Non-aligned factions are granting them access to markets we assumed were irrelevant. They are filling the gaps our sanctions were meant to create. Another delegate, a member of the reptilian Zethus Dominion, hissed in frustration. This is temporary. The humans are opportunists, nothing more. Without the Council's infrastructure, they will collapse within cycles. Vexterra might have believed that a few weeks ago. Now he was not so sure. A new report materialized on the central display. It detailed the dissolution of a long-standing trade agreement between the Council and a once loyal vassal state, the Vresh Confederacy. The reason given was alarming in its simplicity. Human merchants had offered a better deal. There was something deeply unsettling about the casual nature of it. The Confederacy had been part of the Council's economic structure for generations, bound by treaties and shared interests. Yet, the moment a superior alternative presented itself, loyalty had evaporated like mist. A cold weight settled in Vexterra's chest. This was not just opportunism. This was strategy. The humans had positioned themselves as an alternative to the Council itself. The chambers were growing restless, the murmurs of concern escalating into full disputes. The arrogance that had once defined their discussions on humanity had given way to something else: unease, doubt, fear. The Zalari delegate's voice rose above the others. If we do not act now, humanity's influence will spread beyond our ability to contain it. The suggestion hung heavy in the air. Action. For centuries, the Council had ruled with careful precision. True power was not found in war, but in control of resources, of influence, of the systems that civilizations relied upon. Force had always been a last resort, but humanity had changed the equation. They had sidestepped every attempt at containment. If the Council waited any longer, they would no longer be able to dictate the terms of engagement. The decision was made swiftly. A series of new sanctions would be enacted. Stronger restrictions. Tighter embargoes. Direct intervention in the economies of species that continued to do business with humans. If trade could not be used to bring humanity to heel, then force would follow. The Council would remind them who truly ruled this galaxy. It was a decisive move. It was also a mistake. The response came faster than anyone anticipated. As the new sanctions were announced, human-controlled markets did not falter. They flourished. Entire networks of logistics and supply chains had already been established beyond the Council's reach. Human diplomats had anticipated every maneuver, securing alliances with factions the Council had dismissed as irrelevant. The first real fractures in the Council's power began to appear. The Zalari, despite their harsh rhetoric, suddenly found their own markets struggling against human competition. Entire sectors of their economy, once stable and secure, were crumbling. Delegates who had once scoffed at the idea of human influence now whispered in private meetings about defection. The real blow came not from trade, but from something far more dangerous: culture. The humans had not simply built an economic alternative. They had built something that others wanted to be a part of. Their systems were more efficient. Their markets were fairer. The species that worked with them were prospering, not under strict Council regulation, but through mutual benefit. It began as a trickle. A few border colonies seeking independent trade agreements. A few minor factions expressing interest in direct negotiation with Earth. But the trickle became a flood. Entire species were now looking to humanity, not as a problem, but as an opportunity. Vex Terra watched the unraveling of the Council's authority with mounting horror. The humans had not just adapted, they had turned the Council's own strategies against them. They had weaponized progress. The final insult came in the form of a simple request: a delegation from the Rylos Enclave, a long-standing member of the Galactic Order, had petitioned for a formal trade alliance with Earth. In the past, such an agreement would have required Council approval. But the Rylos no longer recognized the Council's authority over their trade decisions. The message was clear. The Council was no longer in control. Vex Terra's hands tightened into fists as the realization settled over him. This was not just an economic shift. This was the beginning of something far worse, a power shift, and the Council was losing. The Council chambers, once the heart of interstellar governance, now reeked of desperation. The walls, adorned with symbols of unity and dominion, felt like the dying echoes of an empire that no longer held sway. The grand hall was filled with delegates, their expressions ranging from barely concealed panic to quiet resignation. The murmur of conversations lacked the confident authority that once defined their gatherings. High Chancellor Vex Terra sat at the head of the chamber, his once commanding presence dulled by exhaustion. Reports littered the massive display before him, each one a fresh confirmation of the Council's collapse. Once loyal factions had severed ties. Trade networks, once thought impenetrable, had fallen into human hands. Council-backed economies were crumbling under the weight of their own outdated systems, unable to compete with the efficiency and innovation humanity had introduced. The final insult had come that morning. The Vresh Confederacy, a founding member of the Galactic Order, had announced its withdrawal. The statement had been brief but cutting. We can no longer afford to be bound by outdated and ineffective leadership. The Galactic Council no longer serves the interests of its members. It was over. Not with an invasion, not with the fire of war. With irrelevance. The humans had not needed to fire a single shot. They had dismantled the council piece by piece simply by offering something better. The chamber erupted into shouting. Delegates accused, pleaded, demanded action. But what action could be taken? Sanctions had failed. Embargoes had backfired. Economic pressure had only strengthened humanity's position. And now, even the threat of military intervention had been rendered meaningless. The council no longer had an army. One by one, entire fleets had abandoned their posts. Officers defected. Even loyalists hesitated, unwilling to fight for an empire that had lost its legitimacy. Vex Terra's gaze swept across the room. For centuries he had ruled with certainty, orchestrating the delicate balance of power that had kept the galaxy in check. Now that balance was shattered, and then the doors opened. Bryn Calloway stepped inside. She walked without hesitation, without fear. The very embodiment of the inevitability the council had refused to acknowledge. She was flanked by two human aides, their expressions unreadable, their presence an undeniable statement. No one had summoned her. She had come because she knew there was no one left to stop her. A silence fell over the chamber. No protests, no outrage, only the quiet recognition of what her presence meant. Vex Terra exhaled slowly, his fingers gripping the edges of his seat. "You have no authority here." Calloway tilted her head, her smile razor-sharp. "That's the thing, Chancellor, neither do you." The weight of her words settled over the room like a final decree. The council had already fallen. All that remained was the acknowledgement. And one by one, the delegates lowered their heads,